Welcome to the EntrePastors Podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello there, and welcome to the EntrePastors Podcast on YouTube. Hey, I'm John Sanders. I'm one of the co-founders of EntrePastors, as well as the co-host of the EntrePastors Podcast, and we're grateful to have you joining us for this week's episode. In today's show, you're going to hear a conversation that me and my fellow co-host Les Hughes had recently with our friend Rob Wentz. Now, Rob is not a traditional pastor. That's not the role that he has served in his career. He's actually had a long career in radio and has a while back shifted into doing leadership coaching and leadership development. And the title of this week's episode is Finding Your Authentic Voice. And you're going to hear an interesting conversation where we talk with Rob about how he found his authentic voice. And we're not talking about your literal physical vocal cord voice, right, in this episode. We're talking about how to really step into the true message that God has called you to share with the world. What is your story, and how do you step up and share that and not hide behind, in Rob's case, what he's calling his radio voice, kind of that persona that you put out there for other people. And it's an interesting conversation. I think it applies to a lot of us that are serving in pastoral ministry and also business. How do you find your true authentic voice and share that with the world and serve people from that place of transparency and authenticity? So great conversation coming your way. Thank you for tuning in. And without any further ado, let's get to this week's episode. Here we go. Well, Rob, it is our pleasure to welcome you to the EntrePastors Podcast, man. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, John, Les, so much for having me here. I'm really happy to be here today and can't wait.
Looking forward to our conversation today. So I think you and I got connected mutually through our friend Justin Janowski, who's been a friend of Les and mine and EntrePastors for a while now. So I always tell Justin, any friend of Justin Janowski is a friend of mine. So looking forward to hearing more of your story and seeing how we can add value, not only to our community and our audience today, but also to the work that you're doing in the world. So why don't we start with just a little bit of an overview? Tell us a little bit about the work that you are doing in the world.
I would be happy to. Thank you. So right now I am a leadership coach, a leadership communication expert. And what that means is communication is everything in life. No matter what we do, we are communicating with ourselves, with God, with other people. We're constantly in communication. So the better that we can communicate, the better we connect with people. The better we connect, the better leaders we become. And so I help individuals and businesses and teams become better communicators and become better leaders, of course, professionally. But the fascinating thing is, and you learn this in life, right, that everything that's professional goes back to personal. So if we talk about professional things, we talk about increasing numbers for a business or increasing the functionality of a team. It all comes back to personal stuff and usually limiting beliefs in our life and how effectively or ineffectively we are communicating. So that takes me back to my broadcasting years. I spent most of my life in radio broadcasting, 20 years in broadcasting. And the reason I got into broadcasting in the first place, I didn't realize this when I was 15, because I was not able to communicate very well. And I didn't, with myself, number one, I didn't really know who I was. And therefore I couldn't communicate with other people very well. And over the years, I just came out of my shell and understood that communication was everything. And so I wanted to be able to impact other people with that, help them become better communicators so they can become who they're really created to be and create the impact they're supposed to create.
Well, that's interesting. So, because I'm thinking of a friend I had in my early adult years that kind of had a similar thing. He was very drawn to like sports broadcasting, but he had a speech impediment. I'm not saying you did, but I always found that interesting. Like, he had a dream. First of all, he had a passion for baseball, but he had a dream of speaking into a microphone when speaking was really difficult for him. So I find that interesting to hear you say that you struggled to communicate and yet you felt drawn to radio broadcasting. I mean, go deeper into that. What was that? You would think that someone who's maybe struggles to communicate would say, keep me as far away from the microphone as possible.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't even know why when I was young, it drew me there. I mean, when I was 10 years old, I was doing pretend radio shows in my bedroom, right? So if YouTube would have been around or podcasting back in the early 90s, I definitely would have been doing those things. And radio was such a safe place for me because there was nobody there. It was
Mm.
me in a room by myself, so I could like be me or who I thought that I was without anybody seeing me, right? So that I didn't have to like see the reaction of somebody's face or what they were coming back with. It was just I got to say the things that I got to say, and that was it. Nobody
So
could
it
have a
was really
rebuttal.
one way. It felt like one-way communication, and maybe therein lies the safety of it.
Yeah, therein lies the safety. And the interesting thing that I learned throughout the 20 years in broadcasting, one of the biggest breakthroughs that I had was my ex-wife at the time. She would listen to me on the air, and this was about 10 years into my career. And she said, Rob, if you would talk the way that you talk to people when you answer the phone on the radio and talk to listeners, if you would talk that way on the air when you were just talking normally, you would be really, really good. But I was putting on this character, I thought you had to be like a radio DJ, right? So I'd talk like a radio DJ and I wasn't being myself, and I would kind of put on a show. But when I was on the phone with somebody, I was just being me. And I
Mm.
had this like breakthrough moment of like, oh, wow, if I just be me, people seem to like that. And
Mm.
so if I just continue to be me, I think I'm going to get better at this thing. And so over time, I just slowly started to adjust to that. Like, okay, just be who you are, be comfortable who you are. You don't need to be anybody else. You don't need to be this guy that you idolize, that you're looking up to, right? And how they sound and how they act. Just do your thing and it's going to work out. And over time, that's when my career really started to take off. And I, got a program director position, music director position, morning show host, and just kept like moving up in the industry. And it was such a breakthrough for me personally, also because I started to realize like there's a version inside of me, a person inside of me that's always trying to get out. And the more comfortable I get, the more I'm able to let this version of me out, which is the real me, the person God created me to be, and not like a facade. And so I realized that I was carrying that person around in my real life, but also in my professional life. And I'm not going to say I'm perfect at it now, but I'm much, much better than I used to be. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons that I got out of my 20 years in radio. But then the thing that I also love to help people figure out, right? So if I help people launch their content or launch their podcast as part of leadership, as part of communication, because I'm sure you guys both realize this, when you start making content, there's a lot of things you have to become self-aware about yourself. You're not used to seeing how you talk. You're not used to hearing how you sound. And that can be very jarring for a lot of people. So the more comfortable you get with you, the better you get as a professional, but the more comfortable you are actually as a human being, and the more safe you feel in your own skin. And I love helping people find that for themselves, because for me, that was probably the biggest breakthrough that happened during that whole journey.
This
Rob,
is
that
interesting.
partially answers a question that I had too, John, and that is, when you talk about leadership, that's a fairly broad category, as communication is. So when you put those two pretty broad categories together, then you got something that's more narrow. So I guess one way for me to ask the question is, what would be the difference in your mind with what you do and somebody that's teaching, say, a course on communication or on media communication? So how does being a leadership communication expert differ from just somebody that's a communication expert? Talk about that, if you would.
I think that when it comes to the leadership and communication together, if you take some courses, they don't really force you to necessarily do anything. If you're working with me, we have to constantly be doing things that are improving your communication on a real, practical, tangible level. So I'm constantly pushing you to do things that are outside of your comfort zone to be a better communicator. So there's a few simple things like being bold, right? What are conversations that you need to have in your personal life or professional life that are pushing you to be bold, right? Because we all have conversations that we don't want to have, that we know we need to have. I just had one of these conversations this morning. It's actually one that I've been putting off for a couple of months. And I was like, I'm sick of this. I just need to have this conversation. Or to be precise, being very concise and precise in what it is that you need to say and how you're saying it. And effectively do that, effectively get that message and put it out there. But I think that the biggest thing I find when it comes to people and their communication is they think about it a lot, they might feel safe communicating with certain people, but not communicating with other people. They might feel safe communicating as inside of a certain role in their company. But if you want to become the leader in what you're doing, you want to become the leader in your own personal life, then you need to be comfortable in all situations communicating and doing it authentically, also without offending people, without leaving the space open for people to feel safe to also communicate back to you. And so the thing I always go back to is just asking questions. So what can we do to ask more questions? What can you do as a leader inside of your company if you're not getting the results that you want? We're going to set up a plan where you have to go in and you have to ask these questions. You have to get to the bottom of what you're trying to accomplish. And I'm going to hold you to the fire in that. We're going to practically walk through that thing. We're going to actually take the action steps, ask the right questions, be bold in that situation to find those breakthroughs that you're looking for. So I'd say the biggest thing is functionally, actually, practically walking people, like holding their hand through that process. That's really difficult for a lot of people.
Yeah. And so you're describing a much more strategic process that integrates into the goals and objectives of the leader and him or herself, and how to carry that out. You're not really talking necessarily about only being effective from a stage or through a certain kind of medium, not that kind of communication. It's mainly taking a message and making something happen to reach goals and objectives.
To actually get things done. Yeah, that's the biggest thing that's missing in anything that's not getting done. It's the execution, right? We can talk about the things all day long.
Yep.
Can always mill about all the things that need to get done, but unless you're actually taking the action and executing on that, that's when things change.
Yep.
Yeah. I want to, in a minute, get to the kind of the entrepreneurial side, the business side of what you're doing and how you're monetizing this way that you're serving people. Because we talk about that on the show, right? We talk about different people who are launching businesses in different ways. But I want to first back up, though, and just, I want to maybe, I don't know if there's a question. I might find a question here. I think I just want to connect some dots for our listeners. There's something you were saying earlier that's really relevant to pastors about, how you had your on-air voice versus your true authentic voice. And I totally get what you mean. There are some pastors that struggle with that. And I'm not saying so much from an integrity standpoint of living two different lives. I mean, certainly we hear those stories and see those. But I would contend the majority of our audience are men and women who love the Lord and try to serve with integrity in, their public and private areas of their life. Having said that, I still think pastors struggle with a public versus authentic voice. Like there's that pressure when they step into the pulpit to change who they really are or to try to come off in less than their true authentic self. So again, I don't know that there's a question here. I just want to maybe draw that out a little bit, that's a real thing for anybody in leadership, in a leadership role. It's probably not just exclusively to pastors that have figured that out, that problem. But I find it interesting that you bumped into that issue. So, okay, here's the question then, because I think this could help. How did you reconcile that? How did you learn to show up on air as you're communicating to the masses? By the way, it's not just one way. It feels one way when you're recording a podcast or sitting in a radio booth because you can't see your audience. But I'm sure you've discovered this in all your years in radio and podcasting. There are real people on the other side of that microphone, right? Like they hear what you're saying, and eventually you do get feedback, which makes it really cool. There is and can be a two-way conversation. It's just a little bit delayed maybe. But how did you reconcile bringing those two things into more congruence of your on-air voice being more in line with your actual voice? There's the question. I knew I'd find it if I just talked it out. So how did you figure that out?
That's a lesson in radio too. You talk until you find out what you're going to say, right? So you talk until you figure it out.
Yeah.
I think that for me, the biggest thing was just doing it and doing it and doing it and knowing that if I just keep going, these worlds are going to merge together. They have to. There's no way I can keep at this without them finally merging together and becoming one. And I think that for everybody, there might be different strategies or techniques that you can use, but man, you just got to do it a lot. And you have to, I asked God a lot especially like recently, this for me, whenever I was in radio, I was still a secular human being. I was not, I had not found Christ yet. But as I get older and I 'cause I still do it now, I'll just ask God, like, give me the right words to say, give me the right words to say, give me exactly the peace and calm that I need to be exactly who I am and exactly who I'm supposed to be. And oftentimes that comes from really trying to clear my mind and let a lot of my thoughts go of what I feel like I should be saying, how I feel like I should be saying it, how I feel like I should be showing up, and also asking God, don't let me worry about somebody else's reaction or how they might perceive what I'm saying. If I'm saying what I'm saying with conviction and I know that it's right and I know that it's me, then it's going to come out the way that it's supposed to come out. And I found that to be very, very helpful for myself. And I think that I can't imagine being on the pulpit, and because the pressure that you're under in that place is much more pressure than there is for a radio DJ, or I'd say anybody who's in a broadcasting profession, because you're being judged by God, right? You're a teacher now. You're being judged, and you're going to be judged more critically or harshly, and that would be a very difficult place to be able to find your true authentic voice. But I think if you just, in those moments of doubt, just pray and ask God, like, how can I communicate effectively in this moment? How can I just be me? And also, if you're prepared enough, then the real you starts to come out. And I'm in Business Networking International, BNI. It's like a giant group across the world for businesses. And I'll sometimes coach people in BNI on how to give better presentations, because people get really nervous giving their presentations. And I'll say, this is your profession. Like, this is what you do. Whatever you're in this group for, that is your industry. You are a professional in this industry. You're an expert in this industry. So you already know what you're talking about. So just prepare yourself enough. And then you're going to come across so much more fluid and so much more natural, because I think oftentimes when we walk into a situation and we're unprepared, then we're just trying to figure out the material, let alone just try to be us. And so the more prepared you are with the material, the more that leaves space for you to just be you. And some people say that they like to go off the cuff. If some people, I think, can go off the cuff, completely off the cuff, and be fine with it. I can only go off the cuff when I'm prepared. Right. So if I'm prepared and I know what I'm talking about, then that natural part of me just starts to come out. But if I'm constantly thinking about what do I have to say next, I don't want to offend somebody by saying this, or I don't want to misconstrue what I'm saying by saying this, then I'm not quite being myself, because I'm way too much in my own head. But when I'm prepared and I know what I'm talking about, then man, I can just be me, and then things just happen.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think, again, I just think a lot of pastors, and I've heard them, I can hear it when a pastor has what I call their preacher voice on. That's not the same way they talk in the lobby. And sometimes it's really pronounced, and I won't give examples of that, but it's like, why do you do that? Why do you get in the pulpit and have the need, brother, to do the, like, you don't talk to people in the lobby that way, So there it is, Les. I gave it to you. That's nice. Why do we do that? And to me, there's some level of, like, I feel it's inauthentic. Like, that's not you. I'm not hearing from the real you. I'm hearing from, like you had said, kind of almost a fake persona. That wasn't the word. I can't remember the word you used a minute ago, but it's not the real you that people are hearing from. So that's an interesting theme to me, regardless of what kind of business you're going to. I just think it's maybe even a little bit extra relevant to this community, who are largely public speakers and teachers and communicators, to really explore that. Like, when you're on stage or behind the microphone, whoever you're speaking to, whatever the venue, are people actually hearing from the real you? I want to switch gears here a little bit.
Can I touch on that just for a
second?
Ahead.
Yep.
Because I really feel like I think a lot of people, especially if they're on camera, on microphone, they don't watch themselves back or listen back to themselves. And you learn so much from watching yourself and listening to yourself, and doing it from a place of, like, you're not criticizing yourself, you're just critiquing yourself and keeping yourself honest with, like, is this actually me? Was I saying this because this is me? Or was I saying this because I thought it was going to get a reaction, or I thought it was cool to say, or I thought it was the right thing to say? So back in radio, right, we would have consultants who would come in, who literally they'd listen to you talk with you in front of them, and then they would critique you the entire time, and it was brutal. It was like so hard to go through, but it was so helpful because I started to learn like, oh, and then I could hear it. Oh, that's not me right there. Oh, this was me. And you can feel it. And you can also gauge the reaction you get, right? Because when you say something off the cuff and it gets a big laugh or it gets a big revelation from people in the crowd, like that happened because it just came to you. You weren't like preparing to say this big thing and get this big aha moment. It's kind of like this natural thing that just comes out of you. So I really feel like watching yourself back and listening back to yourself, you can start to pinpoint areas of like, oh, here's where I'm being inauthentic. Here's where I was unprepared, or here is where I was really in the zone. And you can feel it, and other people can feel that too.
Well, okay. So one more thing, maybe just logistical, practical thing, then we'll get into the business side of it. I know they always say this in the world of public speaking and communication is like, you should watch game film. You should listen to yourself and watch yourself. And you alluded to this earlier as well. Most people don't initially love the sound of their own voice. They don't love seeing themselves on camera. If you do, that's a little weird. Probably. I think I trust someone who kind of has a little bit of a reluctance to hear and listen to themselves. But there is absolute value to it. The same reason, sports teams watch game film of their opponents and even their own performance. Like, we want to get better. It's the same thing, like we get better by evaluating how we're doing in that area. So the reason I think I'm bringing this up, this will set the stage maybe to transition, is we at EntrePastors, we kind of encourage pastors to consider one of three different broad pathways to go down. If we're dealing with a pastor who's not really sure what type of business to launch, here's how we describe kind of three different pathways that right now we're coaching around. There's probably others we'll come up with as we continue to build and grow our audience. But the one that you're really leaning into is what we would call the information-based pathway, where you are monetizing a message. You're serving people around a core message, and that can look like a lot of things: speaking, writing, coaching, running a membership community. And for obvious reasons, a lot of pastors are wired for that. They're like, tell me more about that. I can do that. I'm already using that skill set. We also talk about a service-based pathway, where you're doing some kind of hands-on service for somebody. And then we have a way of training people for e-commerce and selling online. And again, I think regardless of what pathway you're choosing, that whole conversation about finding your true authentic voice really matters, whether you're a public speaker or not. But moving into that, let's talk about this from that angle of someone who is building a business around an idea. You're using your voice, you're using your ideas to build a business. So take us into that. You spent several decades in radio broadcast work, and now you've shifted gears into more of a coaching thing. Tell that part of the story, and then we'll probably have some specifics for you of like, what does that actually look like? How do you create your clients? How do you find clients? How do you decide what to charge for your services? Some of those types of things. So tell us that story of how you shifted gears from just being behind a mic in the radio industry to what you're doing now.
Yeah. So going through radio, coming up into 2017, I knew I had to do something differently. It was interesting. And like I said, I was secular back then, but I think God was really speaking to me in a time. We used to record commercials. And when you were recording commercials, if it was going to be like an evergreen thing that was going to run forever, the end date was 12/31/37. And I can remember sitting in the recording studio and seeing 12/31/37 and thinking like, man, if I'm still sitting here in 2037, I'm going to be so unhappy. I can't keep doing this. And it was like it was like a daily reminder. And quite a few people I was close friends with in the radio industry died in the succession of a couple of years. For whatever reason, radio is one of the most unhealthy professions there is. I guess because we sit around all day and most people were smoking cigarettes, and it's an unhealthy profession, which is odd. And I remember thinking like, I can't be here in 12/31/37. If I'm still here, it's going to be a major problem. And I started learning digital marketing at the time. And so I spent about a year and a half really learning digital marketing. So I had grown my own following on Facebook and on Twitter. And I then joined a online platform that was teaching social media marketing. So I learned that for myself, launched that business in 2017 to get me out of radio. And I ran that up through 2021. And I was going through 3-year separation and divorce. It was really, really difficult. So it just kind of like wiped me out and sent me into this wilderness journey for like 3 years of my life. I was just trying to figure out what's going on in my life. What am I doing? Why am I here? What is happening? Because there was just so much chaos and confusion, and there was not clarity. There was not a clear direction, right? And I did not feel like a leader in what I was going through. Now, thank God that God was calling on me at that point in time so heavily. You know, the less of us, the more there is of him. And there was not much of me, and there was a lot of him pulling me in a direction of, I was doing a podcast, and I met an amazing coach named Peggy Caruso. So Peggy lived about an hour and a half away from me. She'd been coaching for 20 years. And back in 2020, when I met her, she said, you know, I think if you'd ever want to be a coach, I would love to teach you. You'd be really, really good at it. And so a year later, as I was praying, just, God, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? I need to figure this out. Her name popped up in my head, like out of nowhere. I hadn't thought about her in a year. Her name came up. I called her and we talked for a couple of minutes. And I'm like, I want to do coaching. So she said, let's do it. We did about a year program in 7 months. And I got certified. And as I was going through that whole process, right, and she helped me, interestingly enough, as I was going through the coaching program, she was helping me go through this separation and divorce. Like, she was walking with me through that as we were doing the coaching and training. And that was incredibly helpful, how those two things coincided. And as I got into coaching, I really wanted to help people. So I've volunteered and helped and mentored college students and high school students over the years. And I love doing that. And I thought, I just want to be able to just help out where I'm supposed to be helping out and let God kind of guide me where I'm supposed to go. So I was helping college students and high school students and doing some like life coaching and things like that. But I really felt that I was supposed to be helping businesses and helping business leaders because I could make more impact that way. Instead of working with one person at a time, I could work with a team, and I could be impacting not just one person, but, 5, 10, 15, 20 people at a time. And my mentor, Ray, at the time said, whether you're helping somebody with business or not, you're going to be still helping in their personal life. And I know that's where you really want to be. So even if you're working with business owners, you're going to be working on their personal stuff that entire time, just as much as you're working on the business. And a lot of guys, especially, it's hard to work with them in a life coaching, personal development coaching kind of perspective, because they're not as open to it as women are. I found I was getting a lot of female clients, but not a lot of male clients. And when I switched over to doing business coaching, that kind of opened that door to work with more guys who wanted to grow their businesses, who were trying to take things to the next level, or who were trying to build the leadership up within their team better. And I got my foot in the door of being able to help them grow personally and professionally, but also help everybody else that's with them grow personally and professionally. So that's the journey. That's where it brought me. But I needed coaching, and I needed to become a leadership coach as much as like I needed it for me as much as I want to give it to somebody else and help them, because I was going through this transition in my life, and I really needed to be a stronger leader for my son. I really needed to be a stronger leader for me and for everybody in my life. And God told me the one day, who's the ultimate leadership coach? God is. Like, if there's going to be one leadership coach that is going to be just constantly pruning you and trimming you and guiding you, it's God. And I was like, man, it's such a interesting profession to get into. And I meet so many Christian leadership coaches who are so good at what they do. And I feel like whenever you're a Christian and you're letting God guide you, you're letting the ultimate leader lead you in your life. And so if I can let him lead me, then I'm going to be able to do that for other people and have the confidence to be able to do that, because I don't have all the answers all the time, and I don't ask the right questions all the time. But I know if I'm leaning on God to provide me with what I need to give to somebody else, it's going to be given, and the right things are going to be said, the right questions are going to be asked, and the right moves are going to be made. But this is like,
I want to double down on what you just said to make sure our audience heard that. And here's how I'm going to approach it is, I want our audience to hear this from a relatively younger believer. You know, it's in recent years that you've really come to know Christ and start walking with him. And what you just said is absolutely true, and it's absolutely profound that our walk with the Lord, Jesus, is the ultimate leadership guide. Like no one wants to guide and direct and lead our life more than him. Sometimes I think for those of us that have been around it for what feels like a lifetime, in some cases literally a lifetime. I mean, I've known Christ since I was 6 years old, and I mean my relationship with him has grown over those years, obviously, and I understand him in ways today that I didn't as a younger person. But I think sometimes we can grow a little complacent or not callous maybe, but just we lose the awe and the wonder and the sense of like, no, he really is the absolute best resource that I have to speak into my life and to lean into. And that's not just cliche, like that's true. So I just wanted to pause long enough for our audience that maybe have been walking with the Lord for more years, just to hear that from the mouth of someone who's a little bit newer in their faith journey. And I'm grateful that you said that, because we have an unfair advantage. I believe those of us who know Christ and are walking with him, we have the indwelling Holy Spirit. If we're listening and, leaning into what he has to say, we have an unfair advantage over others in the world who are trying to just figure it out on their own. So that's not nothing. Like, that's profound and it's true. And I wanted to not just gloss on past that. So keep going.
Thanks, John. I don't know what I was saying, so I think that was the end of it.
Okay, well then let me ask this question, and I'm keeping an eye on the time here. I don't want this to get too long, but we have a lot of pastors in this community who are drawn to the idea of coaching for obvious reasons. They're good at it. I mean, at least they've been working on some of those skills, working with people, learning to ask questions, learning to, give guidance and those sorts of things. So on some level, it makes a lot of sense, but I'm just going to speak to a real issue. And I'm curious how what your experience has been in this. I get a little bit discouraged and frustrated with pastors who just want to be a life coach because they've seen some things on the internet about how much money they can make as a life coach, which is significantly more than, what they're making as pastors. But they don't have a lot of clarity around what they're coaching. And so they just kind of hang out their shingle of I'm a coach. And it seems there's an idea, because I get this question regularly. There's almost a growing cynicism about coaching, in that someone would say the only people who are making money in coaching right now are people selling their coaching services to other would-be coaches. And like, that's the only people. Now, I know that's not true. My experience has been that's not true. And Les would say the same. Like, we both have been paid by people to actually coach them and not just coach them on how to be coaches.
Yeah. There's a lot of coaching inception going on, isn't there? There's a lot of, I see it a lot.
Yeah. And so it's a real thing. And I think what I'm trying to ask you is, I want to hear about your experience and like, how did you distinguish yourself in terms of coming up with your niche or the thing that you're going to actually do coaching around, instead of just, I'm a generic life coach? Because a lot of people aren't looking for life coaches today.
Yeah, and the life coaching thing is so broad and vast, right. and often this is what the problem I had with my life coaching was, I was getting people that I felt really weren't ready to change. They thought that they were, but when we got to the nitty-gritty of stuff, they weren't moving the way they needed to move. And everybody moves at their own pace, but I don't want to just I would hate to be a chiropractor who keeps cracking somebody's back when they could have stopped and fixed them, 6 years ago. They want to keep getting the paycheck each time the person comes in. I don't want to be somebody who's just coaching somebody just to get paid. I want to have them have real transformation and real change. And I think with the coaching, just like anything else in life, I'm still figuring out where I fit in my coaching, right? So I think it's a constant evolution. That's where I led to this leadership communication coaching, is because leadership is everything to me. It's probably the most important thing in our life, as far as we should want to be leaders and we should want to lead other people, but we should also have people who are leading us, and we should have this constant mentor-mentee mentality. But then communication is everything, as far as if I'm going to be able to accomplish the things that I want to accomplish and help other people accomplish those things, we need to be able to communicate effectively. There's no other way to be able to do it. You can't do it without being able to effectively say the things that you need to say, or have somebody else be able to say the things that they need to say. that just takes time to figure those things out for ourselves. I don't think there's any other way to do it than to give that evolution time to work itself out. But I really feel inside of the coaching profession, if you're serving people at a high level, and that doesn't mean like I'm only going to serve this person once they give me money. Like I'm going to be coaching people throughout the day with anybody that I meet who's open to it. And I'm not going to say to them, I'm coaching you right now, but I'm going to be asking them questions. I'm going to be guiding them towards answers they might need to realize in their life, or situations they might need to confront in their life. And I'm not saying I'm perfect at this by any means, but I try to keep a mindset and a mentality that there's a great book called The Prosperous Coach. I'm not sure when that was written, but in that book, basically the concept is you want to just be showing up for people and coaching the crap out of them, right? So just like helping them before they ever pay you, and they might never pay you. They might never become a client, but your whole objective and your whole goal throughout what you do is, if I'm constantly practicing the art of coaching with everybody that I know in my life, then I'm improving and getting better. And sometimes those people are going to want to come on board. And a guy that I met a year and a half ago, just 2 weeks ago, we'd never worked together, but I had a bunch of conversations with him. And just 2 weeks ago, he reached out to me to coach him in a transition he's going through in his career. Now, I could never have imagined a year and a half ago this would be happening 2 weeks, just like a year and a half later, that he'd be coming on board to work with me. But it's because I planted that seed a long time ago that I actually cared, that I actually wanted to help him. And I think that's the other place, not coming from a place of desperation, but a place of sincerity. Like I actually want to help. I feel like I'm able to help. And if I'm not able to help, then I'm going to refer you to somebody who can help you. Because I've had coaching clients in life coaching who they needed counseling. They needed therapy. So I pointed them in the direction they needed to go in, instead of thinking, oh, I can do this myself. I need to get this paycheck. And I think that's the core when it comes to coaching. It's just serving people at a high level. And if you think about Jesus being the ultimate leadership coach, he sat with the woman at the well. How long did he sit there with her for? He just showed up for people.
Yeah.
They didn't ask him to show up. They weren't paying him to show up. He just showed up and served them and changed their lives. And I mean, that's what he's calling us to do for people. So I think if we approach coaching in that way, then we can't not be successful, because and it might take time, right? Those relationships might take time to blossom. That reputation might take time to manifest, but that's what's going to happen if you truly commit yourself to, like, every conversation is an opportunity for me to be a better coach. And how can I do that? If you approach it that way, you're going to have a breakthrough at some point in time. At least that's how I feel.
Hey, John, I've got a question about that business model, but I want you to write down your next book title, because Rob just threw it out there, and this is your book right here. You ready?
My book or Rob's book?
Your book.
Well, I'm not
concerned
my book.
I'm not concerned about Rob.
I got my pen.
I want to take care of my partner, because this title is very on brand for you. That's why I'm giving it to you.
All right, I'm listening. I'm ready to write.
How to coach the crap out of people.
Ooh.
You better bring a diaper or a cleanup bag or something, because it can be messy.
Because there's a lot there,
Yeah, that's got a lot of meanings.
Well, you better get that book done, because I'm going to start writing it today.
I'm glad you understand where I'm going with that.
I don't know that I can steal that from Rob. That's a brilliant title. That really is, and that should be a book title, Les. And Rob, we can talk with you offline about
it's
our
got a great double meaning. So, Rob, what is, this has obviously been a journey for you. So, what does the business model look like? Where do you land today? Like, as far as your major revenue streams, you're going to get specific numbers, but I'm just talking about, we have people in our community, several that are really wanting to lean into that business side of coaching, but they really have no idea what the different options are. So where have you landed in terms of one-on-one or group or courses or, all the rest of it?
So most of the coaching that I do right now is group and one-on-one. And most of the people that I work with are for 6 months to a year, right? So that's where you see the most transformation. It is a 12-month program. I feel like if I'm really going to work with somebody or work with a team, it has to be for at least a year, because it's really hard to see transformational change in the course of 3 months. 6 months, it can happen, but a year, you get enough time in there to implement all the things you need to implement to see that change happen, especially if you're working with multiple people at a time. So 6-month and 12-month coaching programs, individuals and teams. Right now, I do have a program for helping people become the expert in their industry, and that's through creating a podcast, creating a platform that you can use to generate leads, that you can use to build your expertise in a subject, that you can build to monetize for yourself, make amazing connections. And that course is 12 weeks, but I take that 12 weeks and I double that usually, because once somebody gets the podcast launched, they're going to have to, that's kind of just the jump starting phase, because the next 12 week is going to be, how do I monetize this? How do I find the right people to bring in? How do I get on other people's podcasts? And there's so many different pieces of that puzzle that you need to put together.
That's right. And John, that may, if you don't want to wait for a book, that's a good podcast title, I think, coming up for the EntrePastor Podcast.
Maybe it'll be the title of this episode. We'll find out. I did write it down.
Why
How
not?
to coach the crap out of people with Rob Wentz. I like it. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Rob, I want to back up real quick and highlight 2 lessons that are really relevant to this coaching thing. So I heard you say that it's an evolution. It does evolve. That's true. I think about, as you said that, I think about my own journey in coaching. Les and I both had our own platforms outside of this before we met each other, and he can tell his story, but and I won't go deep into mine. But my evolution was, as I was coaching small town rural church pastors, I kept hearing constant financial struggles. And so in the short story is, I started to lean more and more into that niche of like, I'm sick and tired of hearing this constant narrative of pastors who can barely afford, to live, let alone invest into coaching and that sort of thing. So what I'm saying is, when I decided to be a coach professionally, I didn't just jump into this platform called EntrePastors. There was an evolution to it. Here's another thing I wanted to draw out that I heard you say. You have to naturally be coaching people. I hired a coach who helped me see, John, you've been coaching people for years. You just haven't been getting paid for it. And I look back, I was like, he's absolutely right. I'm energized by being curious and being in conversation with people and serving them and trying to find out, how can we help you get to the next level? Like, that is fuel to me. I love that. He just helped me realize that I wasn't getting paid for it, and I could, start to actually show up as a professional coach and start charging for my services. That was a game changer for me to see it in that way. But it's very relational. Like you said, you're planting seeds, and those 2 things, therefore, cannot be rushed. I think that might be part of the problem in our world, Les, when we're dealing with pastors who are in need of finances and they see potential in coaching, but they want that coaching income. They need the income right now. And it's like, well, you've not been necessarily laying down the relational seeds and planting those. Like you said, Rob, this one recent, client, a year and a half in the making. And it takes time to build that. And also it takes time to kind of evolve and figure out what is the actual crap I'm going to coach out of people, right? Like, what is my actual coaching niche going to be? So again, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to throw in so I have my podcast. It's called The Unstuck Movement, and I would love for you guys to come on. But the concept is finding breakthroughs in people's lives, right? True testimonies of breakthrough. And when you're getting unstuck, I found a theme that shows up over and over and over again in these breakthrough stories, and it's making your mess your message, right? So the thing that's to help somebody who wants to become a coach, where should you be coaching? What was a mess in your life that you turned around? Because now that is the message you can use to serve other people with. Just like a curse and a gift, right? The thing that seemed like it was a curse for you your whole life now becomes a gift that you can give to people and help them find those breakthroughs. So that theme, I think, for every good coach, that's the theme that shows up again and again and again. Man, I went through this thing. I suffered with it for years and years and years. I finally had this breakthrough, and it's not that monkey on my back anymore, whatever that thing is, right? Now
Good.
I use other people to find that breakthrough. For me, it was communication, right? Amongst other things, but communication for me was the biggest thing that I couldn't communicate effectively. I didn't know how to be me. And once I figured that out, and the formula to that, I can apply that to other things in my life. So I just encourage anybody who is thinking about becoming a coach, where did you have a mess? What mess did you get through? You can directly speak to that. So when somebody meets you and you talk about this thing, whatever it is, whatever the mess was, there's so much authenticity behind it because you went through it and you spent years in it. So you can authentically speak directly into that person's life about that thing without any sort of doubt, because you know you went through it. The only thing you might need to do is figure out the system for it, right? What was the system for you getting through it, and the system for you helping other people through it?
Yep, that's good. Well, Rob, this conversation is flying by. The time's going way too fast. I have more questions I'd love to ask you, but let me ask you a really important one. For anybody that's listening and would love to learn more about you or connect with you and follow up with you, what's the best place for them to find you online, and how do they go about connecting with you?
You can find me on my website, which is leadimpacttransform.com, or just go to LinkedIn, Rob Z. Wentz, and I'm happy to talk with anybody on LinkedIn if they want to reach out to me.
That sounds great, man. Well, we're going to put the links to that in the show notes of this episode. And thank you for coming on and sharing your story. I know it's going to be an encouragement to many in our community. So thank you, Rob.
Thanks, you
Rob.
so much, John. And Les, thank you for stealing that book title and shorting me lots of money. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors Podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at EntrePastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.